In this episode with Ellen Frankel, the sound is rather live. She was recording from her dining room table. I hope that you will enjoy the conversation so much that you'll forgive the problems with sound. Welcome to Story Power, a bi-monthly podcast where my guests and I geek out about the stories we're passionate about in all different genres, styles, and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and I started this podcast in the summer of 2020 at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. As I watched the reaction of my friends, family, and social media circle, I noticed that many people turned to stories for comfort and help in making sense of the craziness going on around them. My goal was to do the same for my listeners, but as I chatted with my guests throughout the first year, I discovered that their personal stories were the most fascinating thing about each episode. Neil Gaiman says, fairy tales are more than true not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. I now know that sharing our experiences with others helps us defeat our own dragons. It is our stories that connect us to one another. Let's see what wisdom today's guest has to share with us. So today is episode 44, and I'm talking to Ellen Frankel. And I was looking at your LinkedIn profile, and you do so many things. So I'm so happy to have you on the show. Welcome to Story Power.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Now, one of the things that I was looking at, it said you're a librettist. I mean, I connected with you because you're a writer and you have a book coming out next year. But then I saw librettist. Oh, whoa. And I want to know more about that. So we can talk about your book. We can talk about all of the things that you do, the storytelling and all of that. So
where do you want me to start? Just
wherever you want to start. How does that sound?
Okay. Well, I can start very, very briefly to say I've been a story lover since I was a child. I used to sneak out of synagogue when things got boring and curl up in a little corner, a little niche in the lobby of my synagogue and read through all the storybooks. And Judaism, like Islam and Christianity, is just filled with stories that often fill in the blank that scripture is very terse about. Mm-hmm. So I read all these stories. I also read Greek and Roman myths, and I've read Norse myths, and I've spent my lifetime reading stories. And I wrote a book about I collected 300 traditional Jewish stories at one point. I wrote a book about it called The Classic Tales. And by the time I finished writing that, and I was just learning how to use a personal computer in the early 80s, and I ended up erasing most of what I had written. So I had to write it all over again.
Oh, no.
So by the time I finished, I memorized them. Plus, I was raising two young children, and I would come to the supper table, and they would say, "Mom, what stories did you learn today?" So I told them stories. So by the time all that was through, I knew several hundred stories by heart.
Wow.
And I began traveling. So for the last 40 years, I have traveled all over the country and sometimes abroad, telling mostly Jewish stories, Jewish folktales. And then I got involved as a publisher in publishing a series about that. So that's another sideline of mine. But I've been devoted to the whole Jewish story tradition my whole life. So that's where the stories come in.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And then through my research into stories, I discovered that when Israel began getting swamped by refugees, both before World War II and then after, every community brought stories with them. And a very forward-looking man named Dov Noy, who was the first and at the time the only Jewish folklorist in the world, began interviewing them and assigning others to interview them. And they collected thousands of these stories before the tellers died, but they transcribed them into Hebrew. And as they would tell them in Ladino, or they would tell them in Russian or Polish or whatever, and they all translated them all, and they were put in a little room in the university, out of reach of everybody. They were just sitting on shelves.
Oh,
And when I found out about it as a new publisher, I ran a publishing house. I said they have to be made available to the world. So I launched a series in 1991, which was 30 years ago, and it's not quite done, even though I don't even work there anymore, of collecting by language group, collecting samples of every story from every Jewish community. And then the scholar who is doing this is looking for comparable stories from other traditions, whether it's Chinese, African, French, or whatever, and trying to show where they may have started as one story. So that's been my sort of one of my life legacies as a publisher.
Oh, I love that.
It's another hat. I'm a storyteller, but I'm also I was a publisher for a long time.
Oh, wow. So is the book that's coming out, The Deadly Scrolls, is that your first book that you've written, like novel, or?
It will be my first published novel. I have a closet full of unpublished novels, as do so many thousands of writers. But this is the first that's finally gotten a publisher, and it's going to be part of a mystery series called the Jerusalem Mysteries. So this one, The Deadly Scrolls, is book one, coming out in May, and book two, called The Hyena Murders, comes out in November. So because I spent 7 years and wrote two of them, the publisher decided to bring them both out the same year. So I'm very busy.
Oh, wow. Really? You are busy. Oh my gosh, that sounds so fun though. I'm looking forward to reading those because I like mysteries.
They're sort of, I try to, one very quick sort of elevator pitch about the first book is it's a Jewish Da Vinci Code.
Oh, that will be fun.
Because it involves a murder, a lost ancient scroll, which is a treasure map, the lost treasures of the Second Temple, a terrorist plot, a bomb plot. It's got all the elements of a great mystery thriller, but it's also a puzzle.
Oh, that's cool. That's really neat. And who's your protagonist?
The protagonist is a female.
Oh, good.
She is a young Israeli intelligence agent who works for something like the Mossad, but it's called the Service. And she has a boss who's sexist and wants her to fail. And she is quirky. She doesn't always follow protocol. She's a bit OCD. She takes risks. And she's a puzzle master. So she likes to collect clues and then sometimes take leaps of faith or use her intuition. And this particular mystery that I'm starting with is actually based on a genuine historical artifact. You know about the Dead Sea Scrolls?
Oh, yes. My first degree was religious studies. So yes, I know.
So there are probably about 1,000 partial and complete scrolls, but only one of the 1,000 was written on metal.
Oh.
And it's the only inventory listing stuff. And what it lists are all the missing treasures that the priests hid from the Romans from the Second Temple.
Oh, wow.
And it lists them and it tells you where they are, but the places are not by name. They're go 15 cubits next to the tree that's shaped like a horse, and then go to the cistern around the corner. And it was discovered in the 50s. So for 70 years, there have been treasure hunters and archaeologists looking
for those things.
And they have not found a single one.
Oh.
And it's a coded manuscript with Greek letters thrown in, only one that has Greek letters. And the last line of this scroll says, if you go to this particular place, you will find a copy of this scroll with more information. So it's almost like it was written for a novel.
Oh my goodness, really?
It's not in Israel, it's in Amman, Jordan.
Mhm.
And so I take off from that historical artifact, and that's where the mystery comes from.
Yes, and I've lost track of where the Dead Sea Scrolls are. Are they in Israel?
Well, after the 6 Day War, they were not in Israel. They were not in Israeli possession until 1967. And
Oh,
because of that, it was mostly controlled by Christian scholars on the Jordanian side.
oh,
After the 67 war, all those parts became part of Israel. So Israel gained control.
oh,
There
good.
are, there are plenty of Christians working on it, but they're
Mhm.
now housed in Israel.
Yeah. Oh, good. Okay.
So that's my, and she's going to have romances, and we're going to follow her face. She's a single mom raising a daughter.
Oh, great.
I'm trying to make her not the typical Robert Ludlum or,
Right.
macho hero who is great with guns and blowing things up.
Right. Yeah.
I really want her to be somebody who is witty, tough, and soft, and ambivalent about a lot of things, and sort of struggling with her own identity.
Yeah. And thoughtful, maybe.
And thoughtful. And she comes from, because it's Israel, she comes from a Moroccan mother and an Ashkenazi father. So she's also navigating the two different Jewish cultures who don't always agree. The second novel is about Ethiopian Jews in Israel.
Oh, yeah.
Who also face racism because of the color of their skin. Interested in exploring some of the underbelly of Israel as well.
Oh, that's so cool. So that is so exciting. And I'm really excited to read that.
Well, one of the things I really am enjoying in writing these novels, I've written both this collection of Jewish folk tales, and I wrote a children's Bible, and I wrote an encyclopedia of Jewish symbols, and a woman's commentary on the 5 books of Moses. And I'm bringing into these new books my love and background of folklore and stories.
Oh, yes.
And feminism. I really want to, there's a rich mine of these unofficial parts of Jewish culture. It's not the stuff the rabbis teach about or that the tradition does, but it's just this incredibly rich treasure house of stories and of melodies and of a lot of superstitions. I give talks. In fact, one of the 2 talks, one of my most popular talks around at synagogues and JCCs is the evil eye and other Jewish superstitions. So there just are a lot of things that Jews have lived all over the world because we've been in exile, and we picked up wherever we live, we pick stuff up. So it's really, talk about multi-culti. I mean, it's got everything.
Really? Oh my goodness, that's exciting.
Yeah.
So now it said that you were a librettist for, was it the Philadelphia Opera?
Not the Phil. It was a small opera house. I started, but I started, that was totally accidental. I got a call 20 years ago from a Philadelphia composer named Andrea Clearfield, who had been commissioned both by Hadassah and the Los Angeles Jewish Symphony to write a work called Women of Valor, highlighting 10 biblical women through music. And she had come across my book, The 5 Books of Miriam, and she asked permission to set some of my words to music. And of course, I was thrilled. And then at one point, she needed one more woman that was not in my book, so I wrote something new. And I flew out to Los Angeles for the premiere. It was very exciting. And since then, since that one time, I've worked with her several times. And in fact, we have a premiere also in May of 2022 called Beyond the Binary, which is about artificial intelligence, robots, and gender. And that's going to be performed by the Mendelssohn Choir, 150 voice choir with custom made instruments and robots. I just found out there'll be robots in the show.
Oh, wow.
But I also through that, I got connected to another company, which no longer exists. And we put on an opera called Slaying the Dragon in 2012, which was based on a real life event in Lincoln, Nebraska, during which the Grand Dragon of the Nebraska KKK was terrorizing Blacks, Vietnamese, Jews, women, you name it. And a rabbi, although he was really a cantor, but an acting rabbi, reached out to befriend this monster and actually broke through and convinced him to leave behind a life of hate, come live with him in his home, and eventually the man converted to Judaism. And that's a true story, and we made it and there's a journalistic account called Not by the Sword, and that we made that into a 2-act opera, which was performed 5 times in Philly, and the composer Michael Cheng, who's a Chinese American, wants to revive it for 2023 and make it shorter and even more timely.
Oh, wow, that's so great.
Yeah. And then I was commissioned by somebody else to do an opera on the Triangle Factory, shirt factory fire.
Yes.
So we did that in 2017. And I'm working now with a very young composer in Lima, Peru, who wants to make an opera out of a pre-Incan folktale called Pachacamac, but I don't think he's going to come up with enough money to do it. But I am. What I've learned I've also done about a half dozen shorter pieces than operas. And I once asked the artistic director of Opera Philadelphia, David Devan, I said, what comes first, the music or the words? And he said, the money.
Yeah, really.
So opera, any kind of work with music, you have to raise so much money to pay the composer, librettist, and the orchestra and the hall. It is a very expensive endeavor.
Yes. It's not quite as expensive doing theater unless you're doing a musical. Yeah, I kind of understand that.
But I love the collaboration with a composer. Different, writing is a very lonely profession. You sit by yourself, but with music, the words do come first in the story, and then the composer gets hold of it. And in fact, my composer on this new piece is right now at McDowell Colony, and is setting my words to music as we speak. And wow. She's emailing me almost every day. Can I use this line again? I need another stanza here. This is too long. This is too short. So we kind of work through what will work with the rhythm she has in mind and the mood she's creating and what my original intent was. So it's a much more engaging process than just sitting in front of a laptop.
Really? Although I kind of like that, because right now my life is so busy that I would kind of like to just have a few days where I'm just sitting there working on my novel that's sort of been put on hold while I'm teaching.
But you get to meet all these interesting people, right, through your podcast.
Oh, the podcasting. I want it. Yes, I love that. Yeah, that is really fun. But I've been teaching now since I was 18 in one capacity or another, it's church, school, teachers aid at Montessori schools and child development centers and daycare centers. And then I taught after I got my master's in theater, I taught at Vancouver Parks and Rec, Portland Parks and Rec, gifted and talented programs. I even drove all the way up the Columbia River to this small town and taught like an 8-week drama class for the elementary school. Like it was like 4th and 5th graders or something like that. And that was an hour away from Portland. Then when we moved to Arizona, I got my master's of education, started teaching high school. And after about 10 years of that,
because I was getting older by then. And I'd say that I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up until I was 53 years old.
Yeah.
And so when my students, some of them are older, my college students, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. Well, don't worry about it. I didn't figure it out until I was 53 years old.
I'm 70 and my first novel is coming out when I'm 70 years old. So you never know that, especially for women, although it's probably now true for both. Your life takes twists and turns if you have children, if you take a part-time job, if you have a partner or not. I mean, just there are all sorts of things that happen to you. Like you, I began teaching when I was 12. Also, I tutored kids for their bar mitzvah. I taught Sunday school, and then I kept teaching. And in fact, before we moved to Sarasota 3 years ago, for 7 years, I told stories to a public first grade class in Philadelphia.
I read that, yes.
I taught, since almost all the kids were Black, I told stories from West Africa.
Oh, cool.
I told Brer Rabbit and Brer, Uncle Remus, which is, I guess, somewhat not politically correct anymore. But I also told Native American stories and tall tales. And then I taught the Iliad and the Odyssey.
Oh, how fun.
And Greek myths to 7-year-olds. And with video, I would then find cartoons or puppet shows, and they loved it. They know video games with all these characters. They see them in sports teams, and they never heard of the originals. So yeah, teaching kids and teaching gifted kids or kids who haven't had a chance for other kinds of stories or information is great. I agree with you.
That is great. Yeah, I did finally publish my first book in 2017. And, I didn't take creative writing. I did take some playwriting classes when I was getting my master's, but, I'm not an English major. So, it's not perfect, but I am working on a sequel. It's just going to be 2 books in the series. It's not going to be more than that. But the second one, it's got 2 timelines, and one of the great grandmother is involved in the suffrage movement. And when I started it, there wasn't anything going on really in the United States at the time. And then all of a sudden, boom, all this stuff exploded. So I have more things to write now. And it's kind of in the, I have to organize it stage.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So that you just keep busy all the time.
I do. I failed at retirement, I have to say, as most of us do.
Yes. Well, that's when Barry and I got married 41 years ago. We said, we don't want to retire. We want to keep working and doing our creative things because he's an artist. He's a graphic artist right now. That's his job. But, he loves pottery. He loves drawing. And he's also a kind of a tech geek guy. So he does creative things on the computer. And I started this podcast in July of 2020, and I love doing it. It's the thing that I love every aspect of it.
So how do you reach the audience for your podcast? How do people find you and find your podcast?
I have Podmatch that I belong to, and I actually ask my guests to share their episode on social media. I don't have a large following, but some of my blog followers also follow my podcast, and it's on Google, Spotify, and Apple. And I do try to ask people to rate and review it. You can only rate and review, I think, on Apple Podcasts. And, I'm just building it slowly. I'm thinking about maybe starting a Patreon community with some extra content. Yeah. And I also have a YouTube channel, but I haven't put it up there yet. There are several things that I need to investigate. But at the moment,
Yeah, I mean, one of the problems with freelancers like you and me is that we don't have staff.
right,
We don't have networks. We don't
right,
have a whole bunch of people who do this as a job. So
right,
it all falls upon our energy and our time,
right.
how we budget that.
Well, when my husband retires, he's younger than I am, so he's not retired yet. I'm partially retired. He will kind of take over the social media aspect for me, and he'll help me get my podcast up on YouTube. So I'm still exploring it. And I only joined Podmatch in June, I think. And I have people lined up through next April.
Well, having this podcast air in April would be ideal for me because the book is
Yes.
in May. So that would be great.
Now, but I did see though that you can pre-order
Okay,
it.
pre-order.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I hope that they will still be able to pre-order when this airs in April or late March, early April.
Probably.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in the middle. They told me as soon as the cover was finalized, which it has been, they were going to put it up.
Oh, good.
So it's up there.
Is it on Amazon?
It's on Amazon. You can just put in the Deadly Scrolls with my name. It'll pop right up. It's a really dynamite cover. It's something I would pick up at an airport.
Oh, that's great. Yes.
It really is great. So unfortunately, for financial reasons, and I understand this having been in publishing, it's starting out in hardback. And I push them, but I know how the model works in publishing. You get as much money as you can from the hardback sales because you actually do make a much higher margin. And then it will come out after that. I don't know how quickly in paperback and Kindle.
Right. Ebook. Yeah.
My company hooked up with my publisher that I work with was called the Jewish Publication Society, which is a nonprofit. And we hooked up with the Jewish Braille for the Blind. And they give away audiobooks and Braille books to any people who are visually impaired. And they have actors, professional actors, as well as lots of volunteers who come up. They have a sound studio in New York, and they just record them and send them out for free. And the government provides the machine for them, so that they can enlarge their world. But most of it's handled commercially, obviously.
Yes, right.
Amazon owns Audible, so they've got a whole network.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Amazon owns almost everything now.
I was just talking yesterday with, I finally got a foreign rights agent who's going to try to peddle my books in other languages. And she was telling me she's been in the business for 35 years. And she used to call an agent of somebody in a publishing house. And then she would call them the next year with a new book. And now she calls, nobody's left. Everybody moves all around. And of course, one big house gobbles up a smaller house and then a bigger house. So there are only 5 publishers really left in the world. And they own everything, and they set policy. And a lot of times policy is set by the bottom line. So it's so tough to break in. And what I learned is even if you break in and I had one book published by a major house, well, they stay committed to you for about 3 months. And then they're on to the next list. And your history. So if you don't do it, if you don't promote yourself and keep at it, you can just forget about it.
Right. Which is why I decided to publish mine independently. My husband he designed the cover and he laid it out, and he helped, since he does newsletters and all that kind of thing, he helped me edit it. And but I am meeting some really interesting people through Podmatch, and now I'm paying more attention to LinkedIn. I'm thinking of having like a book partner. And because Audra, her name is A.D. Trosper. That's her author name, Audra Trosper. And Stacey Bennett are book partners, and they both were guests on my podcast, one right after the other. And they get together for like half an hour, 45 minutes. And one lives in Kansas and the other one lives in New Jersey, but they sit on the phone and they write together and they monitor each other and say, oh, get off of Facebook. You need to be writing. And so, they do that regularly. And I thought, oh, that's because I need something to motivate me to finish my second novel. And so I'm thinking about asking this woman because I'm reading her book right now and she has another one coming out soon. And she might actually be able to help me shape my book, my second book, because I'm a little bit at a loss with it. So
well, there are book doctors too. Since I never, you said you hadn't taken a creative writing class. I've never taken a creative writing class.
mm-hmm.
I taught writing, expository writing,
Right.
business writing, technical writing, remedial writing for 15, 20 years as an adjunct. But I never took creative writing. And when it came time to sit and to write a novel, even though I've tried numerous times and failed, I did pay somebody who writes mostly for television series and Hollywood to read what I was writing and tell me how to do it better. And he taught me some tricks. It's when you write in a genre, there are rules, or at least there are conventions. And I went through. In fact, the Deadly Scrolls finally was handed into copy editing on draft 12. So I wrote and rewrote and rewrote and rewrote, and I learned a lot. So for the second book, I did it without him, but he was in my ear a lot of the time.
Yes. Well, I listened to What Should I Read Next was yesterday's episode. She was talking to someone who that's kind of what she does. She helps people fix their books, or she has a book about writing and how it's so important to write, even if you don't publish anything. So I was thinking, I need to go look up her website because I think she has a newsletter. And because I'm kind of to the point now where if I'm going to actually continue writing novels, I need some guidance.
Right. And there are, I have read probably a dozen books written by writers on how they write and have learned a lot. And one of them, in fact, I use intensely to prepare each novel. She has exercises, she has templates, she has a process. And I have used her process pretty much the way she wrote it. And it works for me.
Yeah. And what's her name?
Her name is Elizabeth George. I don't know if you know her. She's a mystery writer who lives in America, but all of her mysteries are set in England. And she's written maybe 15 or 20 books. She is, I've learned also from doing this that there are so many subgenres in mysteries, as there probably are in romance and Western and sci-fi. So in mysteries, there are cozies. Right. So those are in one little place, like in Agatha Christie. There are Gothic. There are female ones designed for women. Anyway, there are all sorts of subgenres. So I don't really have the genre, but I hope to be in the same genre as Elizabeth George, who is interested in exploring character. And she has the same 4 major characters in all of her books. So you follow their lives and their development through all the books. So that's kind of the core storyline. And then each book is a new case.
Right.
But she spends a lot of time on description and on inner thoughts and on, she has, one of the things she has that she recommends for almost every chapter is something called a THAD, THAD. It's called, that stands for Talking Head Avoidance Device. And she says there's nothing more boring than having 2 people at a restaurant, in a living room talking, and all they do is they talk and they talk and they talk. So maybe one of them is knitting something, we'll stop to pick up the needles, or we'll stop to check the pattern, or maybe someone is cooking, or maybe there is a child running around that has to be tended to. So she tries to have an activity in a talking head chapter where the reader gets a little break from all the words. Anyway, so that's, I never saw anybody write about that, but so I do that too.
I love that. Oh my gosh. It kind of reminds me of Alfred Hitchcock and his MacGuffin, the thing that the characters are all so worried about and trying to get, and the audience doesn't really care about that at all because they're caring about the characters and what's going to happen to the characters.
And I have a Hollywood lawyer who is pitching the first book, at least, to try to get it into film or a TV series. So that's a long shot. That is a long shot. Again, those are expensive. There are 1 million people trying to do that. It's luck of the draw. I mean, she's apparently very good and very experienced, and she's trying, but who knows if anything will come of that.
Right. Yeah. Oh, but that's so exciting. You just have your fingers in all kinds of things.
All kinds of things. Plus, then I have a volunteer project, which takes a lot of time, which is I'm helping a small village in Uganda survive.
Oh, wow.
So that's a totally different, it happens to be a little Jewish village, and somebody contacted me on Facebook out of the blue. I don't even know how they found me, and friended me, and we've been working together for 2 years. The village is only 160 people. They're subsistence farmers. Most of the village is under 21 years old. Most of the adults went somewhere else, and they have been facing starvation because of drought, and they are hunkered down often because of COVID. So I've been raising money to send, and school isn't free in Uganda. So I've been raising money for scholarship money for the children, and trying to get a solar powered water pump into the village to help irrigate. So anyway, so I'm learning it. If ever, anytime I feel I have a first world problem, like something I ordered didn't arrive on time, or a piece broke. Yeah. And then I look and see these people, so I know somebody who died of malaria, and I've met somebody who had typhoid, and they have no food, and I'm worried about, late delivery. So it's a good balance to sort of see most of the rest of the world lives.
Well, have you looked at the I think it's called Deep Water, and I don't know if they do only United States, but they started a project in northern Arizona because the Navajo Nation didn't have running water, and so I've been giving money to them, but I think they also helped. There was some communities on the East Coast where the infrastructure had broken down and they needed new pipes and things. And so they've been helping those communities, but I don't know if they do anything outside of the United States.
Yeah, I've been looking, I'll check that out. I contacted somebody who's working in Ghana, in a place that has completely turned to desert. So the only water these people have has to be trucked in. They have no access to it at all.
Yeah, see, that's what they were doing on the Navajo Nation.
We're heading for some pretty tough times. Water's going to be a major, both a major problem and also a major cause of lots of global conflict.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. So usually I ask, do you have any recommendations for books that you think are just fabulous and you want the listeners to check out?
Well, I keep a list. I'm a big list maker. I keep a list of books that I hear about and want to read. And then I also keep a list of books I've read and books I've abandoned. I started and abandoned because I otherwise find myself reading the same book again. And I even rate the books. I do nominally belong to Goodreads, but I don't take the time to put reviews up. Well, a book that I read recently that I found very moving is a book called Migrations.
Oh,
Anyway, it's a novel that is set in the very near future. So I guess you might call it science fiction because it is not based on reality, whatever that
uh-huh.
means. But it is a story of a woman who decides to track what may be the last or one of the last migrations of the Arctic tern.
Oh,
And the Arctic tern is a little bird that migrates from north to south pole and back again in 1 year, which is tens of thousands of miles,
wow.
often without having any access to food. Okay, so that's one of them, and it's set in a time that's almost unfortunately recognizable to us because it's a time when many, if not most, animals are extinct.
Uh-huh.
We're already hearing about the last white rhino and the last this and that. So, and it's a beautifully written book in following an obsessed character and the people that she puts on a boat. But it's kind of a cautionary tale. That's beautiful. Then I also read a wonderful book called Finding the Mother Tree.
Oh, I've heard of that one.
Suzanne Sigurd, Sigard, and if you read Overstory, which is another book that I highly recommend by Richard Power. Overstory is the story of it's an ecological fable about people trying to save trees. But in that book, in Overstory, is a character who is a professor of forestry, who discovers that trees communicate with each other underground. And that fictional character is based on a real person, and she somehow was persuaded to write a book about her research. So it's called Finding the Mother Tree.
Right.
Beautiful, beautiful book. So that's another one. There's an author a lot of people don't know about named Robert Crummy, Crummey. He's Canadian. He doesn't have much of a reputation, but he's an extraordinary writer. And he has written several books. One of them is called Bedlam, I think, which is about somebody spit out of the mouth of a whale. And they all, most of them take place in Newfoundland or somewhere, some remote areas of Canada. And I just finished one, and my memory is so terrible, really so very terrible. And I'm sorry that I can't pull up.
That's okay. I'll look him up.
Yeah, anyway, he has only maybe 5 books, and I would recommend all of them. He's really an extraordinary writer. And I'm trying to think if I read any mysteries that, I mean, I read people like Louise Penny and people like Daniel Silva, and I do read, and they're not, I love Anne Cleves, who sets her stories in the Orkneys. I do read books of nonfiction. I just finished a book by Walter Isaacson, who wrote a biography of Einstein and of Steve Jobs. He has a new book that's called Code Breaker. And it's the story of, and I should know her name.
Yes, I know.
She's the woman who kind of figured out CRISPR. And the reason we have the COVID vaccine as quickly as we do, and it's not because of the genius of the people who worked on it. She's been working on messenger RNA as a delivery device for vaccines for 30 years. So she was sort of ready when we needed it, she was ready. So this is I read some quote from, I don't know if it was Isaacson, who said, if you want an overnight success, it takes years of planning.
That's right.
Yeah, anyway, so that was a very well written book. I enjoyed that a lot. So those are the books I can think of I read recently.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you. Yes, another guest of mine did talk about Finding the Mother Tree, and I have heard of Overstory, and I've also heard of the Walter Isaacson book. I just haven't read it yet.
It's long. It's very long.
Yes. And my husband is an Apple user, so he read the Steve Jobs book.
Okay.
So he's been using Apple since 84 or something like that.
Right. And we also, when we take long drives and we commute between New Gloucester, Maine and Sarasota, Florida twice a year.
Oh, wow.
It's a 1,500 mile trip.
Wow, really?
And yeah, we have kids up in Maine. So we listen to books on tape. That's how I know about readers. And we read we listened to an extraordinary book by Rohinton Mistry, who was an Anglo-Indian writer who left India in the 1970s and has lived in Canada since then. And he wrote a book called A Fine Balance, which is about the Indira Gandhi era and the emergency.
Oh.
And it's really like an epic. I mean, it really is. It really is an incredible, incredible book.
Wow.
So I can highly recommend that too.
Yeah.
Another one I read, this has been out now for a year, is A Paragon, Apeirogon by Colm McCann, who's an Irish writer, but it's about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it's sort of a crossbreed between a work of journalism and a work of fiction.
Oh, wow.
And that is really fantastic. Okay. Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, I thought was fantastic. Yeah, I just have so many books here. Yeah, so I'll as we talk, I'll keep going, but I think that's probably enough for
that's fantastic. I'll put them all in the show notes.
Okay.
Yeah.
H is for Hawk by Helen MacDonald. As you can see, I read a lot of natural history. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell.
Oh, I do want to read that one because I like Shakespeare.
Very good.
Yeah.
That is really, really very good.
Yeah. But hawk would be fun. We have a hawk that likes to sit on the mesquite tree right outside our kitchen, where the bird feeder is.
Wow. Well, so H is for a Hawk is a nonfiction work about a woman in England who raises a hawk for sport. But in the course of her wandering, she runs into who wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yeah. Tolkien.
She runs into Tolkien and she has a whole sort of side story about Tolkien and what he was like. So that was really strange, but a real worthwhile read. So I would say
I was going to say almost like Moby Dick with all those chapters about the way. I've never read that book, but I've heard there are chapters and chapters and chapters about whales and their life cycle.
And how to make whale oil. I mean, it's right. It has it's huge. It's a big, kind of free for all about stuff like that. Absolutely. Anyway, so I think maybe I'll stop there. The other thing we listen to on long trips are Caribbean literature. Because those are the kinds of books where there are so many accents and dialects on the island that if I were reading it on paper, I probably wouldn't understand a lot of the stuff or be annoyed at the spelling. But when you hear somebody who knows the languages and reads it, it is, it really grabs you.
That's cool.
So
yes, well, years ago, before audiobooks, my husband and I would read Sherlock Holmes stories to each other when we were driving on long trips.
Absolutely. It's a great thing to read aloud. And I'll tell you one more that we heard on Kindle or on audio, but was so gripping. It was called The Narrow Road to the Deep North. By Richard Flanagan, who is an Australian. I read somewhere that it's going to be made into a series. I don't know how soon that will happen, but it's a story of somebody who was in prison camp maybe in Burma during World War II and what he went through. And so that's another really great one. So I guess I have to bring this to a close.
Yes, and I'm so grateful that you talked to me because, oh my goodness, you have so many great things to share.
Thank you.
So thank you for being my guest.
I really enjoyed it. I learned a lot of things from you too.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. You'll find the show notes for this episode at my website, Sage Woman Chronicles, at sagewoman.life. You can leave a comment there. And remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.